Cormac McCarthy fans, today we are going to be talking about the title of Blood Meridian. Where did it come from? How did Cormac McCarthy come up with such a dope name? And one of the things I noticed at the Cormac McCarthy archive is that there wasn't much information about the formation of the title of Blood Meridian. When we look at McCarthy's Southern novels, there is a massive amount of brainstorming and correspondence about those titles with his editor. But there's also a lot of lost letters and information about these meta decisions at the University of Virginia in the Albert Erskine archive, who was McCarthy's editor. So if you want to be a tryhard, you got to go there to get a lot of this stuff. But of course, I have theories and have been researching McCarthy for a long time, so I'm going to throw some of those out here today. But our conversation can't really get started without mentioning Captain Mayne Reid's book, The Scalp Hunters, which was very influential on McCarthy's research of Blood Meridian. And at the start of the book, the word meridian is used, and there is also some interesting stylistic similarities between how McCarthy writes Blood Meridian and Reid. And the quote starts, quote, "Unroll the world's map and look upon the great northern continent of America, away to the wild west, away toward the setting sun, away beyond many a far meridian. Let your eyes wander. Rest them where the golden rivers rise among peaks that carry the eternal snow. Rest them there. You are looking upon a land whose features are unfurrowed by human hands, still bearing the marks of the almighty mold, as upon the morning of creation. A region whose every object wears the impress of God's image. His ambient spirit lives in the silent grandeur of its mountains and speaks in the roar of its mighty rivers. A region redolent of romance, rich in the reality of adventure." Okay, boom, there is our first hit with Meridian. Is that an absolute exact match with McCarthy's style? No. But McCarthy wasn't writing like Robert Browning. He was writing in this weird postmodern naturalist elevated style that was axiomatically rooted in the King James Bible. And he was writing a Western for the first time, engaging with the land for the first time, and was drawing from these authors that we talk about on this channel all the time. And so did he read that and be like, man, that word meridian, I really like that? Probably not, but it's interesting that it's at the start of a very influential book on him. But now let's get into some of the more meta and deeper theories. And if you guys have theories, comment down below, everybody. I read every single comment. Eventually, I respond. Sometimes it takes me a month or two because there's hundreds of comments that stack up. And if you guys give me these crazy theories, I want to read them and appreciate them and maybe even make a video about them, which I do all the time. But when we look at the title, Blood Meridian, or the evening redness in the West, we could really pick out a lot of the phrases or words and look at their impact. But the obvious big kahuna is Blood Meridian. And where does McCarthy get this term from? Well, in the Lord Byron poem, Stanzas to the Poor, it reads, "A stranger loves the lady of the land, born far beyond the mountains, but his blood is all meridian, as if never fanned by the black wind that chills the polar flood. My blood is all meridian. Were it not, I had not left my clime, nor should I be, in spite of tortures, nearer to be forgot, a slave again of love, at least of thee." So now we can go a couple different places with this idea of the blood. Because in a little bit, we'll be talking about the time traveling aspects of the meridian and the mirroring effect that I personally think, if I had to take a vote on where I think the title comes from. But this theory is also important. And speaking of Blood Meridian, if you guys would like some dope Blood Meridian and Cormac McCarthy apparel, I have launched my official shirt website. And there is a ton of super cool Cormac McCarthy hoodies, streetwear, shirts, long sleeve, whatever you're looking for. I'm adding to this every single day. And the website name is shortlore.com. There's a link down in the description below. But at the start of the novel, there is the epigraph about the 300,000-year-old skull that had been scalped. And that is kind of, these epigraphs, one by Jacob Boehme, which kind of sets the precedent for German idealism and Gnosticism. And then the one about that is referencing the violent tendencies of man all throughout time. And this is because from the Jacob Boehme quote, that because we are living in the world of the demiurge. So in this illusionary world, and because we are products of that creature that is violent and whatnot, then we become violent. And even after hundreds of thousands of years, we are still existing in this lineage with this blood. Because when we look at the word blood, we can take it two ways. Like I said, the shedding of blood, Comanche scene, or in the lineage sense. And us as Westerners, we don't think about this at all. In ancient Greece and Rome and stuff, they would have the wall, the ancestry room, where you'd go look at everyone's busts and be like, grandfather was great. I can be great too. Most of us aren't going through with that anymore. I mean, the middle class also really didn't exist all throughout history. So a lot of us peasant folk or former peasants are now out here. And that's one of the things we kind of miss, is the contemplation of our lineage, and then at a broader level of human nature. Because once you start to play with people putting dominion over others and start looking out in the world and looking at yourself and how you treat your spouse or your friends or your pets, and how the government treats you, and all the dominion that is still inherently embedded in our life, then it can knock your socks off. I mean, there are people who are homeless or committed suicide because they went too deep into this. And we're not chopping heads off with the Comanches anymore, but we're just doing a more refined version of that same lineage. And when you look at it from a spiritual level, because we are humans with higher consciousness, even though animals and plants have their own type of sentience and consciousness that we may never understand, we have rationality and whatnot. And what that with that becomes inherent, maybe, if you agree or disagree, these objective moral laws of, should we commit violence? There's this boundary of violence. There's this meridian of violence. And you'd hope when we gained higher consciousness, we wouldn't have to transcend over the blood meridian or into the blood meridian. But it is our human nature that McCarthy argues that we transcend that border time and time again, even though all throughout time it's one of those main things. Don't do that, but we just do it. Even to people we love, domestic violence, the most unreported crime in America, or probably in the world. A union that was meant to be loving is very violent, and that boundary is getting crossed. While we're in lineage, and let's move it quickly into secret society stuff before I get into the main thesis, because Freemasonry is also a very big part of Blood Meridian. And a lot of the symbolism of the occult, and you could say of Christianity and the West in general, is astrotheological. When we look at Ra and Set and the movement of the sun over the horizon, and Jesus, the sun coming back, and like all these different metaphors, and the theme of return, which naturally comes from the idea of the return of the sun and whatnot. Then all this is kind of embedded deep within us, and the occult understands this and tries to kind of dial that down. And in Freemasonry, which was very popular in the 19th century Western world, I mean, you could say, as I'm sure you know, that Freemasonry, because of the founding fathers, if you go to the Masonic Temple in Philadelphia, it will blow your mind about how beautiful and crazy it is with knowledge. Anyway, it was very popular in the 19th century, especially with someone like a Judge Holden. And the meridian height is the sun peaking. It's when we are at the middle of the day in the absolute sun. And when you look at Blood Meridian, and this is actually going to be, I think, shown in the movie, because we have Mr. John Hillcoat, love him or hate him, coming in. And if you look at it, I think 2004, 2005 movie, The Proposition, it was shot at a lot of the time at kind of high noon, very bright visuals. There's some exceptions, like the ending sunset scene, and then the kind of middle of the movie where after he finds a brother, not to spoil anything, I guess I just did, he's watching the sunset. But out in the desert, there is no escaping. There is no forest. It's just bright. And so this theory doesn't have as much precedence, but it could, because there are multiple references, like direct references to Freemasonry within Blood Meridian. Okay, so let's start putting all these ideas together, because there are two different main theories that I hear talked about all the time. There is the meridian of the sun, right? There is the meridian zenith position, or there's this metaphorical boundary, or there's a third contention that when the soldiers, were Blood Meridian spoilers, ride into Chihuahua, it's actually right at the middle of the novel. It's the meridian. It is kind of the high point of the novel. And then from then it takes a whole other turn. And as you hopefully saw in my Blood Meridian time traveling and mirroring video, McCarthy has hundreds of mirrors, which means if there's something 3 pages in, there's something very similar 3 pages from the end. And so when you're doing a system that has hundreds of different mirrors in it, the middle is a good point, and the middle is the meridian. And so I think that's a puzzle piece. But I also don't really think that the idea of it just meaning about the meridian of the sun. I don't buy that. There's something to do with a metaphorical boundary, and what that metaphorical boundary is up to debate. But I feel like this idea is that once you cross over that boundary, as I was talking about earlier, once you move over it, which they somewhat do after they go to Chihuahua, they kind of are they're on this noble mission, and they at least think they are. They all are just a bunch of people who are ready to rape and pillage. But after Chihuahua, once they're there in the city and they're knocking on the door, looking for the women in the households to rape and stuff, they move over. Then we have all the Yuma stuff, and things start to get a little bit crazier. And they are moving into this primitive bloodlust. And this is a big theme in Cormac McCarthy's The Crossing. No real spoilers here. But every time the characters cross back to Mexico from New Mexico, things get worse every time. There's more to that bloodlust. And that kind of compounds finally in Juarez, in Cities of the Plain. It just is all out violence at some level and like weird lust. And this idea is challenging the romanticized vision of the West, of freedom and all these different things, and is pitting it as this land of decay. And that kind of leads us into the second part, because we've just been sitting here and analyzing Blood Meridian, but what about the evening redness in the West? And I think that is obviously a reference to what happens on the other side of the Blood Meridian. And the West is reddening, though. The West is coming down, because this violence of the West is what eventually ends it. Things get so bad, not just on the American side, but with the Mexicans. We have a Mexican-American War. We have the Comanches and the Apaches and all those tribes, and our them putting them onto the reservations. I don't even know what the forced migration of these people and calming them down, and the calming down of, Texas and whatnot. And then the Civil War. There was a lot happening during, that period of the Wild West, all based in violence that eventually gets shut down completely. And this kind of connects to the epilogue and, kind of talking about this kind of dimming of the West, because the Wild West is gone, but as I talked about earlier, that lineage, that pulsation for violence is still very inherent and even more tactile and malignant now. People love to act like it's not, but 300 million people died, or 265 innocent people million people died from democide in the 20th century, which is innocent people dying from government, not military soldiers, innocent people. When we only have a couple billion people, that is a terrible number. Population of the world in 1900 was only 1.6 billion. So an eighth of that, even though, the population exponentially grew toward 2000, is still a lot. And so what McCarthy is doing with Blood Meridian is creating a postmodern, deconstruction of the West, of the main themes. It's crazy to think about. I've been saying it all the time. The more I'm reading McCarthy and seeing what he's into and whatnot, I'm like, man, he's really doing it. This isn't a Western. This is a critique of violence, of the West. It's not some glorification, as much as the lit bros like to circle jerk over that idea. McCarthy never does that. Even in things like No Country for Old Men, where we have Anton Chigurh and he's, being all violent. It's contrasted by Sheriff Bell's contemplative nature and these ideas of old age in this new world. And that's why McCarthy's Westerns are actually all really a series of sequels that eventually peaks with the counselor talking about the cartel and how it's just now totally out of control. Every book kind of moves in order. We start with Blood Meridian, then we move to the Border Trilogy, and then a little bit longer, a couple decades down the road with No Country, then eventually to more the modern era, with the counselor. And when we look at the final scene of Blood Meridian, humanity is depicted as vanishing, with the judge patrolling the outer lands under a blood-soaked sun. This reinforces that there is no salvation or redemption for the man or even the Western world in this book. But I also find it funny, going back to the other side of the theory, that we have meteor showers, constellations, hallucinations stemming from the sun, and all these kind of desert astronomical effects going on. And so there is a lot here. And like I said, the next time I'm at the archive, I need to dig deeper. I maybe need to email some people to try and see what they've gotten on this and kind of the deliberation process of the names. Because when you look back at other McCarthy novels like The Orchard Keeper, there were at times 10 to 20 working titles that were really good. And same with Outer Dark, Child of God, even Suttree. There were a ton of different disputes going on. But with the later books in the archive, you don't see that as much. I think McCarthy kind of had it before he sent it in. He kind of knew, like he knew the passenger's name all the way back to like 1980, because he said that was coming out, which is another interesting thing I need to talk about another time, is that McCarthy thought he was going to release the passenger before Blood Meridian. So in this whole kind of sequence I talk about, where does that one fit in? Anyway, let me know what you guys think, and I will see you guys in the next video. Go buy a t-shirt, go sign up for the Cormac McCarthy course, or just like this video. Watch some more, and that would mean a lot to me. Peace.